was admitted into the hospital in ICU, dying, fighting for my life. They had also put me in a medically induced coma. While being in that coma, I was in that nothingness, and then suddenly I was in this big white room. And then within just a fraction of a second, something to my left caught my attention, and I looked. That whole side of the room was this beautiful, bright colors of gold and yellow and some orange and even colors I don't think I've ever seen. And I knew instantly that this light was coming from Jesus. And he said, "Tell everyone."
Welcome to God's Voice Today podcast. I'm your host, Vladimir Praknevsky, and I'm so glad you're tuning in. Quick disclaimer. I'm still recovering from the flu, so if my voice sounds a little shaky, you know why. But hey, the show must go on, right? Today, I'm really excited to introduce Diane Carroll. She's part of our free private community at family.godsvoicetoday.com, which makes this conversation extra special for me. It's always amazing to connect with people from our community and hear their stories. And Diane was a little nervous about sharing her story, which I totally understand. It's not easy to open up like this with thousands of people, but I'm so happy she decided to do it because her story is powerful and full of moments that will really resonate with you. Diane, thank you for stepping out of your comfort zone and sharing this with us. Let's jump in. Well, Diane, welcome to the show. So excited to have you. Before we jump into talking about your near-death experience, and it's a powerful near-death experience, can you back it up a little bit? Can you paint a picture for everyone watching what your life was like leading up to that experience?
Sure. I was raised in a Christian home. My parents were very involved in the church. I remember riding a Sunday school bus with my dad. He drove the Sunday school bus and picked up all the little kids that would come to Sunday school. So praise the Lord. I never questioned God, never questioned, whether he existed or not. I just accepted that he was real, and that's just the way it was. So I'm very grateful for that. And, that, has carried me through a lot of difficult, challenging times in my life. Looking back, I can see over the 50-something years that, it seemed like the enemy always would really, really go after me hard. When I was born, my mom and I both almost died. It was very serious. And I guess the doctors even asked my father, if we could only save one of them, who do you want us to save? So, yeah, I didn't know that until just recently. But anyway, and when I got to be a teenager, I think I was curious. And, and like a lot of kids, I had a kind of a bad attitude, listening to a lot of secular music and stuff, and kind of got into going to like kegers and the partying scene a little bit. So kind of fell away from going to church and things like that. But I always still believed, and I thought I was good, as far as that goes in that department. But I never really had a personal relationship with the Lord. I prayed. I occasionally went to church. Like I said, I always believed, but I thought, I was good in that area. So later, I was 21. I got pregnant with my first children because I had twins. And that kind of steered me back onto, the Lord and the more spiritual aspect of life. I grew up a lot because I had to think about somebody else besides myself, and be a good parent. And part of that for me was teaching them about the Lord and about his word and praying and faith and all those, important things. But still, I myself still had no real connection or personal relationship with him. He was probably like a lot of people. I love the Lord, and I knew he died for me, and, was the only reason that I was able to have hope and forgiveness. But I thought of him like a distant relative, kind of like, far off in the distance. There was no intimacy with him at that time. And I really didn't understand what that was, but anyway, so we would go to church and stuff, and my twins were raised in the church, when they're little. Well, my husband at that time suddenly became very ill, and he ended up passing away from pancreatitis, which in his case was caused from a inherited syndrome that I guess is pretty rare, which left me with, at that time, then I had 3 girls, the twins and their younger sister. So before he passed away, we had found out that a neighbor man who lived across the street from us, we knew that him and his wife were foster parents, and they would take in foster kids. the one little girl went to school with our little girl, one of the twins, and they went over there to play one day. And I remember I was so worried about them crossing the street. That was my biggest concern. I had met the foster parents. They had older teenage children. They were Christians. They went to a Pentecostal church. And so we just thought that was great that, they were taking in these troubled kids and teaching them about the Lord, taking them to church and stuff, So I had no reservations at all about the twins going over there to play one afternoon in their yard. And I remember, looking out there and make sure they wouldn't cross the street without me, because that was my biggest concern. They were 6 years old. So anyway, they went over there and played one day and they came back, and then we later found out that the man had molested our daughter, one of the twins, and they came forward, and we of course went to the law. And they believed my daughter right away. They said, kids don't make up, stuff like this in the detail and stuff. So I remember having to draw upon the Lord's strength to get through just a day, even an hour. Some days I didn't open my blinds and my curtains in the front because the front of our house faced their house across the street. And I was seriously afraid that if I saw that house and it reminded me of what that man had done, that I might not be able to control the human side of me, and I, might go over there and do something to them or something. I didn't know, but I was in shock that people could be so evil, So anyway, in the meantime, the state removed their foster children and the police began an investigation. He ended up being charged with multiple counts of child rape and child molestation. And, he took off, didn't show up for court. He was bailed out and then he didn't show up for court. So we ended up going on America's Most Wanted, and, praise the Lord, about 4 years after it aired, he was caught. And he was caught because somebody recognized him on the show. So, but that experience taught me, I had no choice but to rely on the Lord just to get through a day. And I wanted to be a good example to my girls, that when things get hard and things get tough, that we can trust the Lord. We can rely on the Lord. We have faith. We believe and we pray and we let him take care of the rest, because, he will. And I was thinking, and I remember telling my girls this, and they were pretty little still, but 6 years old, but I wanted to encourage them that, number one, they did the right thing by telling them, and number two, we can trust the Lord. And so sure enough, when he was caught, I was able to say, see, I told you, you just trust in the Lord. He'll take care of it, he takes care of his children, Anyway, and life went on. And then, my husband got sick and passed away. That was another time that I had to really, really exercise my faith and trust in the Lord, because I had planned on being a stay-at-home mom, and my husband was, he worked, but when he passed away, then I didn't have a formal education. I had my high school diploma, and that was about it. So I had to now support myself and 3 children. And so life changed for us, quite a bit. I worked 3 jobs, 7 days a week to make ends meet and raise them. Well, sometime later, I met my current husband, but my children were raised at this point, and we got married a couple of years later. And then fast forward to like 2019, when was it 2019 or 2020, when the COVID virus hit. I had heard, really bad things. And then I'd heard also that some people, it was just like getting the flu, sort of like. So I didn't want to get it either way, but, so my daughter was over one afternoon and we were standing in my kitchen talking, and, I don't remember what we were talking about, but suddenly I got this, just an urgent, like profound feeling came over me, and I couldn't help it. I interrupted her and I just said, Jamie, if I'm ever in the hospital and unable to speak for myself, make sure they don't put me on the medication. I said the name of the medication, but it was a medication that at that time had been approved for treating patients with COVID in the hospital that were put on a ventilator to breathe. And it was just automatic that if you were in that situation, unless you or your family member told the hospital otherwise, they just automatically put you on this medication that has been outlawed in other countries. And I thought it was really strange, and she thought it was really strange too at the time. And she just kind of looked at me weird, and she said, just kind of looked at me like, really? And I said, yes, Jamie. I said, look me in the eyes and promise me you won't let anybody ever put me on that stuff. And so she said, okay, Mom, I promise you. And I said, I promised her the same thing. And I meant it, but it was odd because it was like, where'd that come from? Just out of the blue. We weren't even talking about anything like that. We're talking about like the kids and stuff. But throughout my life, I'd had things like that happen where I would just have this knowing of some random thing that I shouldn't really know about at all. And I would just know. I just knew. And, when I was a teenager and stuff, some of my friends would say that I was like psychic or something. Well, I had been a believer all my life and trusted the Lord. But, the one thing is that I didn't really understand was the spiritual realm, because I had never heard about it in church, or, I heard the term spiritual warfare. I knew that the devil, the enemy, was out there and seeking to kill and destroy and stuff. But other than that, that's about as far as my knowledge of any spiritual battle or anything like that went. That was it. I very rarely read the Bible. I saw it as a chore, something I should do, but I didn't really want to, So anyway, well, little did I know, a month or not less than a month later, after I was standing in the kitchen with my daughter, I would be admitted into the hospital in ICU, dying, fighting for my life. So obviously, the Lord knew that was coming, because I'm sure that's why that came to me with the urgency that it did. I recognize now that that's how the Lord speaks to me. And I know he speaks to different people in different ways, but that has been our, communication. I mean, his communication with me was just, the best way I can describe it is just a knowing. I would know something that I had no reason to know, but I couldn't choose what I wanted to know or choose when it happened, or it would just come to me at random times, random things. And so at first, for many, many years, I didn't recognize that was the Lord trying to speak to me. I didn't recognize his voice. You know how in the Bible it says, my sheep recognize my voice. Well, if I had a relationship, a personal, close relationship with him sooner, then I would have realized and recognized his voice. But because I didn't have that connection with him, I didn't recognize it as that. So I had contracted COVID, and my daughter had been trying to convince me for a couple days before this, actually a few days before this, to go to the hospital. But I thought she was overreacting. I thought, I just need more rest. That's what I need, more rest. And so she would, bless her heart, stop by here and on her way to work and check on me and check my temperature and stuff. Well, I had 104 temperature. She finally called my mom, not knowing what else to do, because she had already called the ambulance the day before, and they came, but they told her she makes sense. She's coherent. We can't force her to go to the hospital. And they couldn't believe that I was even able to converse with them, because my oxygen levels, when they checked my oxygen, were below 50. And, they like to see it around 98 or above. And mine was in the 50s. So they talked to me and tried to convince me, and I ended up telling, well, if I get feeling any worse, I'll go. I'll call. And so my daughter left that day, and she called my mom, and she said, Grandma, she's dying. I know she's dying. I know it. I know my mom. And she's like, can you try to talk her into going to the hospital? The next day, my doorbell rang, and I thought, that's weird. And I answered the door, and my mom was standing there, which I thought, because it's a two-hour drive for her to my house, one way. So, usually if she was coming, we would communicate, we would have it planned out. So I answered the door, my mom's standing there, and she tried to act real nonchalant, but I could see the worry in her eyes. And she convinced me to go ahead and go to the hospital. Moms able to do stuff like that with their kids. So, and I thought, well, they're just totally overreacting. I'll be home tonight with some medicine or something. And then, then they'll realize that they're just, being a little, overreacting or something. And so worried for nothing, because there was a lot of fear out there, which is a tool of the enemy, as I know now, of this COVID virus. It was a big deal. So, and we all heard horror stories and stuff. So, I thought that was just playing on their minds, and they were falling for all the hype and stuff. And so I went in the ambulance to the hospital, and about the last thing I remember was the EMTs wheeling me in to the ER, and doctors and nurses rushing all around and asking me a lot of questions and things. So they admitted me in the hospital, and they put me in a room with, I was COVID positive. So they put me in a room with another lady that also had COVID, and they gave me oxygen in a mask that I just put on my face. And I don't remember this, but I think because my fever was so high, I wasn't in my right mind. I had 104 temperature, and I wasn't very cooperative as a patient, I guess is the best way to put it, which is not like me at all, normally, So they kept telling me you have to leave that mask on, and I kept taking it off because I was trying to talk to my family members who weren't allowed in the room because of COVID, but were there was a glass wall, and they were outside the glass wall, and they kind of like the movies when you see people talking on the phone thing with the glass in between them at jails. It was kind of like that. So, but I was having a hard time talking with that mask and stuff. So I'd take it off, and they would come in and kind of get after me and tell me I had to leave it on. So finally, visiting hours were over. So my family left, and I was doing okay at that point. They hadn't spoken to the doctors yet, but my daughter got a phone call in the middle of the night that night that I was now in ICU. I had been intubated, and which means they put a tube down your throat and into your lungs, and hook you to a machine that will, push oxygen in your lungs and help you breathe. So they had also put me in a medically induced coma because it's, I'm sure very uncomfortable and not a fun experience. So I was on paralytic drugs as well so that I couldn't, accidentally rip tubes or some wires or something out. So they were pretty shocked, because I seemed to be doing okay when they left. But that happened sometime in the middle of the night. And so a few days later, the doctors called the first of several family meetings, and they told my family that my condition was very serious. They said, we want you to know this could kill her. And not only did I have the COVID virus, but I also had sepsis, which is an infection in your bloodstream. And I also had double pneumonia and RSV virus. Any one of those things can take a person out, But having all of those, they were very concerned that I wouldn't be able to recover. But they were doing everything they could, and they were fairly optimistic at that time. My room was right across from the nurses' station in the ICU. And my family, praise the Lord, I've been blessed with a family of faith-filled believers, and they were praying, and my kids had their churches praying, friends of their families at their churches had talked to their other family members and had their churches praying. It ended up being that actually there was people praying for me all over the world, which is incredible, which is a cool thing about being in God's family. And my youngest daughter had started a prayer request for me online in a prayer meeting room. So I had a lot of people praying for me, and of course my family too. Well, we're getting close to about 2 weeks of me being in this coma, being really sick in ICU. And at that time, the doctors then called another family meeting. They said, it's hard for us to tell you this, but it's not looking good. It's not likely that it's more likely she won't make it than she will. At first, it was kind of a coin toss, they said. But now, usually if we're going to see improvement from what we've seen with this virus and people that, get it and get this sick, we're going to see that improvement within the first 2 weeks. They're going to start turning the corner. We just haven't seen that with your mom, with your wife, with your daughter. So, and the longer she's on that ventilator and stuff, then the harder it's going to be to get her off of it. It's been 2 weeks for not seeing any improvement. And of course they'd see little glimpses of hope. It'd be short-lived because they would turn down the oxygen. I'd do okay for a couple minutes and then they'd have to end up turning it back up because I couldn't maintain the lower oxygen levels on my own. Anyway, so that was the first of a few, I think there was 4 altogether, family meetings where they then said, even to the point of trying to make them feel, or maybe they weren't trying to, but they felt guilty somewhat because they said, she's taken up a bed that somebody with a lot better odds of survival could use. And then they ended up saying, at this point, when she does die, or when something finally gives out, she can have a heart attack, a stroke. They said, that's going to be an awful death for her. And they said, we can give her a controlled landing. They called it a peaceful death, a peaceful exit, So they were really, really pushing for my family the last couple of weeks to take me off of all life support measures, provide comfort care, and just let me go. Of course, that's hard to hear for a family, a loved one. But some of my family were for doing that, and some were adamantly against it. I don't blame anybody for the stand they took, whatever that was, because you trust the doctors. They know what they're talking about. They're educated. They see this stuff all the time. So they know what they're talking about. But the thing they didn't know, obviously, was God had other plans for me, because it was right around that time they were really pushing hard for my family to take me off of any life-saving support. So then I started turning a corner about that time. Now, little did I know. I mean, the whole time with the exception of these couple of things that I'm about to tell you, I was in nothingness. It wasn't bad. It wasn't good. It was just nothing. And one of the things that I do remember while being in that coma, I was in that nothingness. And then suddenly I was in this big rectangle shaped white room. And I don't remember seeing anything on the walls or no furniture or anything, just a big white room. I never saw a tunnel or any of that stuff, never had a floating sensation, never a, being pulled down sensation. I wasn't there, and then I was, wherever that was. And then within just a brief fraction of a second, something to my left caught my attention. And I looked to my left and I realized that whole side of the room, the whole entire wall was this beautiful, beautiful, bright colors of gold and yellow and some orange and even colors I don't think I've ever seen here. And it was like beams of light. And I knew instantly, I knew I had that knowing again that this light was coming from Jesus. I knew it. I knew it was coming from him. Now, if I had been not so overtaken and in awe about what I was seeing and being in Jesus' presence, I would have asked a lot of questions at that point. How did I get here? What's going on? Did I die? I was just so overwhelmed being in his presence with him that it was like I was kind of in a daze, I guess, because I just couldn't believe it, And we spoke about a lot of things, deep things, but for whatever reason, and I believe now that he took a lot of it from my memory, because it'd be like giving me the answers on a test, sort of like, some deep things and stuff. But there's lessons I have to learn to grow my faith and to grow spiritually. I have to be able to do that on my own, make the choices that I make and things like that in order to evolve spiritually. So a lot of it was taken from my memory, but there were a few things that he wanted me to remember. And I do. One thing I remember is walking with him near a river. I don't recall seeing any other people. There was grass, there were trees. It was beautiful. And we were walking along the river and talking. I never saw his face, but I saw when we were walking by the river, I did see he was wearing what I would describe as like a choir robe, but it was white and it had some sort of a sash or belt around the waist. And I did recall seeing long, wavy brown hair, but I never saw his face. And he had some sort of like sandals on or something. But at one point, he gestured with an arm, and the sleeves were really loose, Anyway, he gestured with his arm to the right and up a little bit. And I looked and I saw all these it was beautiful. These little, probably like 2 inches long by maybe a half inch wide or maybe a little more wide. And there was thousands of them, and they were gold in color, and they were kind of twirling and dancing upwards. And I remember thinking, wow, what is that? That is beautiful, And before I could even finish that thought, he told me, and by the way, we never used words, spoke like we are with our voices. I would think something and he would answer my question in my head. It wasn't like telepathy, but that's the best way I can explain it to you. That's, the only word I know that would describe talking with someone, communicating with someone without words, without sign language, without writing, just in our heads. So that was interesting and pretty cool too. But he answered me when I was admiring those little golden ticket things. They look like little tickets that you get at the fair, about that size, but they were gold in color. And the light from him was reflecting off of them. It was really beautiful. I could have watched it forever, really. So he told me, he said, those are the prayers of my children. And I just thought, wow. And I knew then I again had that knowing, the Lord's voice speaking to me, that I knew they were so special and so important. And it had a lot of significance, in this place, wherever I was. I'm not sure where I was, but in the Lord's presence, I knew they were significant. They were special. They were like adored, honored. And I knew that. So I was still watching these things, and the Lord like sectioned off a portion of them, and he said, Diane. And I looked, and he said, those are prayers for you. And I couldn't believe it. It really touched my heart, and still to this day brings me to tears, because I instantly knew that not only that, those are the prayers of people, these prayers were so important. And I knew that a lot of them were from people I had never met. I didn't even know. And so that still just really touches my heart. They had prayers from all over the world for me, and why I was chosen to have this encounter, I don't know. I know there's probably a lot of other people that are more worthy of something like that, but were more deserving, or I don't know. But I'm just grateful that I did have it. And so that was, and I'll tell you what he told me before, the last thing I remember him telling me, at the end, but that was going on while I was in the coma in the hospital fighting for my life. I had a PICC line too, because they were giving me strong antibiotics right into my bloodstream because of the sepsis that I also had now. Anyway, bless my family and my children. They came every day. I had visitors, but they'd only let one person in my room at a time for short periods, like 15-minute visits. So they'd come and decorate my room. Valentine's Day came and went. They had hearts and pictures. They put pictures of myself with my family and things on my bulletin board in my room. And because they wanted the medical staff to see that I was a real person with a family and hopes and dreams and all the things that go with being a human being on the earth. Because I didn't look like that at the time. I didn't have any personality. I was just a body laying there being kept alive. So I think this may have been when I actually woke up finally, that I experienced something that was really shocking and terrifying to me. There was a nurse that would come in my room, and the fear that I felt and the just pure rage and hate and everything negative, everything dark, this nurse carried around with him. And I would have these little brief glimpses of cognitive ability. That this is one of those times is when that nurse would come in. And I'm sure it was because the evil and the hate and the darkness and the rage just came from this nurse. And I knew he hated me. He hated my guts. He wanted to kill me, and I knew it. The weird thing was he had the face of my husband, which I thought was odd. I dreaded him coming in my room, and he would come when never had another nurse with him. And looking back, I can see now that he never gave me medications. He never even physically touched me. He would come in the room, in my hospital room. He would look at the monitors and stuff. He would look at that stuff. And then he would get really close to my left ear, and he would whisper these weird, sickening, sweet lies, like that he loved me and, oh, you're doing great. And he would whisper these things in my ear. And some of it I don't remember. I think it was so creepy to me that I blocked it out even. It was very profound, terrified me. And I remember trying to, act like I was asleep because I didn't want him to know I was awake. I couldn't understand. I didn't know this person. Why did he hate me so much? Why did he want to kill me? And why hadn't he done it yet? I thought it was really strange. But you have to understand that these cognitive moments I had were there was a couple seconds, and then I'd be out, out again. This took place shortly, maybe when they started slowly cutting back on the medications, trying to wake me up after when they first saw a little bit of hope that I may be turning a corner. But they had thought that many times, and then I'd go back down the other way. And so I'm not sure when it occurred, but it was during the time that I was in a coma. And so that's one of the things I remember. Another thing is I woke up in the middle of the night, and I knew it was the middle of the night because it was dark in my room. And mind you, I'm on medications that are supposed to not allow you to remember anything, that you're not supposed to be able to move. Paralytic drugs so that I wouldn't pull something out for my own safety, And I shouldn't have woken up. I was in a coma, It's not like you wake somebody up who's sleeping. But I woke up this night and I didn't know where I was. I knew immediately that I could not breathe. I couldn't breathe. There were alarms going off in my room and lights were flashing and there was this beeping, all these different beeping machines. There was machines everywhere, but I didn't have time to think about where am I, what's going on. I knew I needed air. I needed oxygen and I needed to find a way to get some right now. I couldn't understand why I couldn't take a breath. I didn't understand that. And again, I got that knowing, and it was the Lord, because a little bit above my hospital bed and to my left, I noticed there was this accordion type hose tube, and I could hear the air coming out of it. And I just knew that I had to get that. It sounds crazy. I had to somehow get that tube and put it in my neck. How would I have known to do that? The last thing I remember, I wasn't intubated. I wasn't, I was not aware that any of this had happened or how long I'd been there or any knowledge of these machines or what they did, or I had no clue. But I had that knowing again. I knew I had to get that tube and somehow get it in my neck. And that was what I had to do. And I knew it. Now I know again that it was the Lord, speaking to me, guiding me. But I tried to raise my right arm and realized my wrists were tied down to the bed. Thankfully, I did have some leeway there. So I slowly raised my arm, and it was like it wasn't my arm. It was like it was somebody else's arm. My brain was trying to tell somebody else's arm to move is what it was like, because it was like the connection was messed up or something. Again, I was on those paralytic drugs, so I'm sure that had a lot to do with it. On top of that, it felt like it weighed about 500 pounds. And so I made this kind of wild, very uncoordinated grab towards that accordion tube, and I thud. My arm just fell down on my abdomen, and I didn't even come close, I don't think. Of course, everything was real blurry too, so my eyes wouldn't focus. It was dark, except for the lights blinking and flashing. And I was very weak, so I said, Lord, help me, because I knew I had to get that hose with the air. Well, I made another attempt, and this time I at least hit the tube with my hand. I felt it, and it kind of moved over there. And the Lord knew I needed just a little bit of confidence or realization that it could be done, because that gave me the strength to try one last time. And I knew this was going to be my last attempt, because I just had nothing, no strength in me left to try again. So again, I said, oh Lord, please help me, please help me. And I raised my arm, and to my shock and joy, I had that tube in my hand. I stuck it in my neck. How did I know to do that? I don't know. Well, I do know now, but at the time I didn't have any knowledge of knowing that's what I would need to do, myself. That came from the Lord. It was just the Lord guiding me. He knew what I needed. At that time, I had to believe. I had to trust. I had to have faith, because on my own, I wouldn't have known to do anything. I would have died. I would have died. And that was, that was in the works. It was without the Lord intervening, I would have died. So then I remember I just had this, relief isn't even the word. I felt the oxygen going to my lungs, and I was just out. I was out. The alarms were still going off. The lights were still flashing. Nobody ever came. And it just breaks my heart, Vlad, because I just wonder how many times somebody's been in that position like that. And I was blessed because I heard his voice. But how many people didn't hear his voice because they didn't know him? Maybe he tried to reach him, but tried to tell them. But because they didn't recognize his voice, they didn't, have a relationship with him, they died, and they died without the Lord. And that's sad to me. Anyway, so I lived, but I'm sure that night, if not before, if the Lord hadn't given me that miracle, that night of telling me what I needed to do, give me that knowing, spoke to me in that voice that I recognized in that knowing, I'm sure they would have got a phone call in the middle of the night or early in the morning that I had passed away. And nobody would have ever questioned it because I was very sick. And the doctors told my family, you're just prolonging her suffering at this point. That's all you're doing. You're prolonging her suffering. She hasn't made any improvements. She's actually getting a little worse. Her lungs are so scarred and deeply scarred. There's no coming back from that. Lungs that look like this, and they showed an x-ray of my lungs. They said they can't repair themselves. They can't heal. They will never heal from that. And they were starting to get, from what I understand and from hospital records, they were starting to get a little irritated with my family, I think. And I think that they were just thinking, oh yeah, well, no one wants to, they're in denial. Nobody wants to admit that their loved one isn't going to be here anymore. And, but they don't know Jesus, Anyway, yeah, I'm sure I would have been another statistic. But anyway, then going back to my encounter with Jesus, which was the first thing I thought of when I did finally wake up completely from this in coma I had been in for almost 2 months. During that encounter with him, the last thing I remember him telling me, and it's kind of funny because when he told me, it just had such a huge, meaningful impact on me. And it was like earth shattering. It was amazing, and I just hung on the words. But this is what he told me. He said that the time on the earth was running out. He said, I'm coming back soon. Now is not the time for people to be foolish with their salvation. And he said, heaven is real. I am real, and hell is real. And he said, tell everyone, is what he told me. And so it was, when he said it, just carried so much impactful, eye-opening, impactful message. When I repeated it, or conveyed it, I should say, I didn't repeat it right at first, but when it came from me, I just thought, what? That's not the impact it was supposed to have. I mean, because that's not the impact I got from the Lord, when he said it to me, it just meant so much. But coming from me, it just sounded like what a disappointment. It just didn't sound like it carried the same punch, as it did when it came from him. But when I did finally wake up completely from that coma and had turned a corner, and the doctors were and still are amazed. They can't believe it. They said themselves I was a miracle, and they'd never ever seen anybody as sick as I was. Leave the hospital not in a body bag is what they said. But the first thing, Vlad, that I wanted to relay was that message from the Lord, because I didn't want to disappoint him. I wanted him to be, happy with the way I handled his message and the importance I placed on that message. And I still want to do my best to tell everyone, like he told me. However, it does not carry the same weight that it did for me when he said it. But my daughter was sitting next to my bed when I woke up, my youngest daughter. It was her birthday. I didn't know it then, but she said, Mom, and she looked very surprised to see me awake and focusing on her, like my tracking with my eyes and stuff. And I just shook my head, and she said, Mom, do you know where you are? And I shook my head again, and she said, do you know how long you've been here? And I didn't know. But in my head, I was thinking, well, maybe a week, it's probably been a few days. She said, Mom, you've been here almost 2 months. And I just couldn't believe it. Because I was in that nothingness. And there was no time. I just couldn't believe it'd been that long. And so I was kind of shocked. But knowing that, the first thing I communicated to her was about that message from Jesus, because I was afraid that if something else happened, I want to make sure I did what he told me to do, and I obeyed him. It's very important to me, and it still is. But like I said, I don't have the impact that I wish I did that he had when he said it. But you know what? I was blessed and grateful, thankful to be here, grateful every day. For a little while, I did have some survivor's guilt because I didn't feel like I was worthy to deserve such an awesome experience, but we might have questioned the Lord, so I'm just going to make the best of it. And that's what I do. And that's my testimony.
Wow. Powerful.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Diane. I think you said on the phone that when Jesus was telling you about that time is running out, he had like an hourglass in his hand, right?
Yeah, he showed me in my head, he gave me a vision. It was just a big giant hourglass with the sand was coming out, at the bottom, and there wasn't much sand left in there. I remember that. And while he showed me that, he was telling me the time on the earth is running out. And he said it like it was very serious and urgent that people realize this. They better realize this because I from him, I got how important it was, but I don't have that ability to do that like he does. But I'm telling you and everybody that will listen, the time is running out and we are running out of time. He's coming back soon. You don't want to be caught without Jesus.
If you think about it, tomorrow is not promised to anyone, right? It's like all you have is now. You don't even have tomorrow. That's not guaranteed. But I don't want to put you on the spot guessing how much time we have. But I'm curious, have you thought more about that? And, no one knows the day or the hour. But if you had to take a wild guess, is it like decades, just a few years from now?
I don't think, so I'm in my 50s and I don't think I will. I think my retirement is going to be in heaven. That's what I think. I feel like a lot of us that are alive now will see the end of things as we know it.
It's interesting. My father, he's in his 70s and he believes that he will see Jesus' return before he crosses over. Yeah, it's getting late. It's getting serious.
He said he's coming back soon. He knows it's soon. He doesn't, yeah, I wish I knew that, but I'm glad I don't because then people wouldn't practice faith and they wouldn't, get their lives right until the last second, and I think that's why he took a lot of that, what we talked about, our conversations from my memory, because there's lessons I have to learn. There's faith I need to practice. There's things I'm supposed to accomplish while I'm here. And if he gives me all the answers, then that's kind of like cheating on the test, So
I love that he said, share with everyone. And how cool that you are doing just that. You're on this podcast sharing this with everyone. You're warning people that you were created for such a time as this.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having your podcast. I truly enjoy everybody's testimony I've heard on there. Incredible. And are you surprised, Vlad, that there seems to be an increase? Is that what it is? Or is it just that we have more access, like, through the technology and things that we're able to hear these testimonies now more? What do you think?
It's interesting. I had my face-to-face encounter with Jesus 9 years ago. I had a face-to-face encounter with him in a dream, and he told me that he was going to help me with this podcast. And Diane, I thought it was going to happen the next day. In fact, this morning I found another YouTube channel called God's Voice Day that I started years ago. 9 years ago, I have like 4 episodes on there. But every time I try to start it, it just never took off, and I get discouraged and just turn it off. But now, more than ever, in 4 months, today, actually, before this phone call, crossed 50,000 subscribers. It's just taking off so fast, and it's the right time. But to your point that the time wasn't right. Now it is right. The time is right. And all these testimonies are coming up. People are calling me. I have more testimonies than I have time to cover them all. And there's so many testimonies.
So do you think are there more testimony? Are people experiencing these things more now because of the time we live in? Or do you think it's just that we have access to them more now?
I think both. But there's something about, I think there are more experiences now. God has given these experiences to people to edify our faith, to encourage us. And testimonies are powerful. They give people a lot of hope, especially right now. People need hope. Let's talk about those golden tickets. It's interesting. When you shared with me on the phone those golden tickets being prayers going up to heaven. Do you remember more details about those tickets? What wasn't? Or was it just it looked like a ticket, but could you tell what was written on those tickets? Or was there anything written on those tickets at all?
I couldn't see what was written on them. I knew that I knew. It was that knowing, again, and that now I know is the way the Lord speaks to me. But I knew that they were of the highest importance. They carried a message, and I don't know if it was written or what it was, but they each were very special. They were like just the utmost importance, and they were revered, and they were looked highly upon, very highly upon. And they each carried a message to the Father, but I don't know how that was in them, but they each did have a message from his children, and so they carried a lot of weight. They were very special and very important where I was. Yeah. I don't know where I was. I don't think I was in heaven. I don't. But I was in a place in the presence of the Lord.
So it's kind of like an in-between, so to speak, right?
Yeah. However, I don't believe like in a purgatory or something. I don't believe in that. But I don't think it was on the earth, and I'm not convinced it was heaven either, because I think I would recognize, or I would know,
So it's like some kind of neutral territory.
Yeah. Yeah. It was just a place. It was like we were on a picnic, just me and him, and we were just talking, and told me things, showed me things. Some of it I knew, some of it made, I was able to bring back, and some of it, most of it I was not, but it definitely had impact on me.
It's interesting how he said, these are the prayers of my children, right? And then he pointed out the other prayers. These are prayers for you, that people were praying for you. And I couldn't help but think of people that don't have anybody praying for them. How sad. And I look at prayer different after talking to you. I've been telling everybody at work, everyone I meet, telling them about your story, about how you saw those prayers in heaven. They're like little receipts, right? When somebody prays, it's not just making noise. Something happens. It's like petition to heaven. And I remember my father-in-law telling me how when his father passed away, his parents passed away, I think his father, he said he felt like prayers stopped, right? His father was a praying man. He prayed for him. He felt like there were prayers going up to heaven for him. And then after his passing, it's like it all just went, stopped completely, and he felt it.
Yeah, I experienced that myself. My grandparents, praise the Lord, he blessed me with the best possible examples of Christian life that I have ever seen in over 50-something years of being on this earth. And they just happen to be my grandparents. And I can relate to that, because when my grandfather passed away, and a couple of years later, my grandmother did. They were married 73 years, and and they always put God first. Always. They were great examples to myself and the rest of my family. But I felt like there were less prayers for me after my grandfather died. Then after my grandmother died, then I wondered if anybody was praying for me at all, really. I mean, they spent a lot of time praying. So, I'm so blessed to have had them in my life. That scripture, Vlad, about raise a child up the way they should go, and when they grow old, they won't depart from it. And that was so true in my case. I never left the Lord, or, decided I was not going to believe in him or anything like that. There was definitely a lot of room for improvement. And, I'm so grateful now for the experience, because I now have that personal relationship. I feel like I know who he is, what his personality is about, what he's, what makes him happy, what makes him sad, what makes him tick, like we know about relationships with each other on the earth, that those things you just, about somebody if you really know them, what their favorite things are, what their, favorite food is, I didn't know that was even really possible.
I remember on the phone speaking with you, and you were saying how you kind of sort of read the Bible before, but after this whole experience, it was like a totally different shift. Can you elaborate more on that?
Well, I've read my Bible occasionally before, but it was more because I knew I should. I knew I was supposed to. It was more of a duty or a chore that I needed to do once in a while. But I'm ashamed to say that I didn't look forward to it. It was a lot of words that really meant not much to me. I didn't really grasp the context of, the scripture within the context of what I was reading, and all the these and those and thous and just, their different way of speaking when the Bible was written, that I didn't really, some of it I got, most of it I didn't, and I had no desire to really delve in deeper to find out what it meant, whereas now I really look forward to that, and I'm learning so much in the scriptures. And if there's something that I don't really get or understand, I look it up. I go to the concordance. I, find out the meaning of the original word and things like that. And to me now it's exciting. It's our history. It's our past, and it's our Father. and it's getting to know what matters to him. So
it's like I tell my kids that they can't live on my revelation, right? I come from a third world country. Well, Ukraine, I don't know what is it, second, third world country. So I grew up very poor, family, 9 kids. I remember having to share toothbrushes growing up. I mean, it was rough, right? My father was an underground pastor in Kiev, Ukraine, persecuted. And now I have 2 sons. One is about to be 9 this month, and the second one is 12 almost. And sometimes we'll be eating a steak, and they're like, I don't want a steak, and I'm like, man, you don't even know how good you have it. Like, you don't even know. And I can tell them all day long how blessed they are to have what they have. That they don't have to take turns to go outside to play because they don't have they only have one pair of shoes like we did in Ukraine. We had to take turns to go outside because we didn't have enough shoes for everybody. But one day, as I was complaining, I was like, man, you boys are so spoiled. Like, oh my gosh, one day I'm going to send you to Ukraine to your relatives, and you're just going to, when you come back to this soil, you'll be kissing this soil because no air conditioning there. No. But all day long, I can tell them how good they have it. But unless they have their own revelation, right? It's kind of like sometimes you got to hit rock bottom. Sometimes you have to have that kind of experience so you can have a revelation. So, because sometimes somebody's revelation, they share it with you and doesn't hit you the same way because you didn't go through the same things, right? So you can't really live on their revelation until it becomes your revelation. It's useless. It's information without application. It's just entertainment. And so for you, this experience, do you feel like you needed that experience to kind of have a different perspective on life?
Absolutely. I had a lot of time to, and I still do. I go over in my head, I just can't believe that he chose me to have that experience. So I'm so thankful for it. But I think, over my life, if I look back, there were several things, several times I had to rely on him. That was all I had. I couldn't reach into the spiritual realm and save my husband or, I relied on the Lord, during those times. But the problem was, I think, is then after the tragedy ended, that was kind of the end of my intimacy with the Lord at that time. And I don't think it was intentional. I had to be a single mom, had 3 girls to raise. I had worked 7 days a week, so it was easy to just kind of let, that was something that I could, put in the background, and focus on what I thought was important right now. But now I realize, I put him first and the other things they'll fall into place. I just try to be a light in the darkness. And I think if I'm representing Jesus and I'm calling myself a Christian, then I better be representing him well, because if I stumble or I say a cuss word or I get angry at somebody and not acting like a Christian, then people are watching you when you claim to be a Christian, and they watch to see how you handle different things. And, and so, it's a challenge, but with the Lord's help, I'm improving. So, yeah.
We're all a work in progress, right? Well, I'm curious, did you ever doubt this experience?
No, I never doubted it. I doubted that I was capable of telling everyone, I thought to myself, how am I going to do that? I only know so many people. And, so then I thought, well, I'll start writing it, or something. But no, I never doubted it. But I think some people that I've told do, and that's okay, because if it means something to one person or helps one person or encourages one person to have that personal relationship, then, it's all been worth it. One soul is precious to him. And, if I can reach one soul, then it's all worth it. I had to learn to walk again and talk again. I couldn't sit up on the edge of my bed. It took all my strength, Vlad, just to hold my head up. It's amazing how fast your physical body loses muscle when you don't use it. So it's been a real challenge. It's been a real challenge physically, but I'm so grateful for it. And the spiritual warfare and the spiritual things that happen are so real. And I just wonder why more pastors and more churches don't better equip their congregations with the knowledge of how to deal with that kind of stuff. I don't know. Now, Maybe I'm sure there are churches out there that do, but not any of the ones I've ever attended, and I just wonder why, when that's such a important aspect to our Christian walk in this day and age, especially.
Yeah, I've had Carl Falcon on the show, and he was talking about just that the churches are not equipping people to battle, we're not a lot of people know that there's such thing as a spiritual warfare, right?
Right. Yeah. That's only something I heard of in the last few years, or so.
And speaking of spiritual warfare, that nurse that walked into your room and whispering things. So I know you mentioned that the nurse whispered things. So from what you said, it sounded like there was positives, certain positive things. Did the nurse also say, threaten to kill you as well?
I don't think so. I actually blocked a lot of it out because I just thought it was so creepy. And that's part of why I know it was a demon, is because, I knew later. At the time, I thought it was a nurse. And when I woke up, that was one thing I told my family was, or I communicated to them. I didn't tell them anything because I couldn't speak, but finally was able to convey to them that I was begging them, please don't let that male nurse back in here. He hates me. He wants to kill me, and I knew he did. I knew it. He looked normal, looked like a normal person, wore blue scrubs. He had my husband's face, which is really, I think that was an attempt to gain my trust or something. And he never said anything negative, never touched me, never physically hurt me. But I knew he wanted to, Vlad, and I knew if he could, he would, and he would take great pleasure in doing so if he could. And I knew it, so that's partly why. And what I realized later was, looking back on it, because I prayed about it when I got home. I wasn't sure what that was about. My family had no idea. They said, Mom, we don't know who you're talking about. And I was like, duh, the one that looks just like my husband, I can't miss him. They never saw him. When I started getting better, Vlad, he never came back. Never saw him again. After I woke up, he never came back. And I think he was there to make one last attempt to deceive me, to trick me into trusting him, because the enemy didn't know if I was going to die. Everything said I was going to die. The doctors said I was going to die. All the scientific testing and stuff that they did all said she was a goner. But the Lord knew I was going to live. So that's why he was there. I believe that's why he was there. And the enemy will deceive you, lie to you, appear as an angel of light, and I believe that's why they thought I was going to die too. So they were making one last attempt to get my soul. And I wonder how many people that have encountered something similar on their deathbed, and we don't hear about it because they died.
Well, that's what Carl was talking about. Those demons that showed up for him, that were going to take him to hell. And he's like, wait a minute, I'm a Christian. I'm not going to hell. And so he cast them out, and sure enough, they fled. But if you were not equipped to know your authority, if you went along, ignorance is not bliss, right? And how important it is to know.
And even though he looked normal, said nice, sweet, just sickening sweet things and stuff, what he couldn't hide though from me was the evil that just radiated from him, the rage, the hate, the anger. I could feel that from him. I knew he wanted to kill me. And at the time, because my cognitive abilities weren't, where they normally are, and on a lot of medications, but I just remember thinking, why does he hate me so much? What did I do to this guy? And he's a complete stranger. I don't know why he hates me. Why does he want to kill me? It puzzled me because I didn't understand the hate he had for me. But I didn't know at that time he was a demon either. So
there's another person I interviewed for this podcast, Felicia Washington, and she had a similar experience where a nurse knocked on her door, but it wasn't human, and the same kind of thing. And so when I heard your story, it kind of brought back that conversation with Felicia. But it's interesting. The Bible does talk about testing all spirits, right? How important it is to do that, because you can be deceived.
Yeah, if I didn't pick up on the, all the diabolical evil that radiated from him, if I would have been, in even a deeper state of a coma or whatever, I believe I woke up because the evil was that heavy in the room. Just like I woke up that time when I couldn't breathe. But it took something tremendous for me to try waking somebody up from a coma and let me know how that goes, because it shouldn't have happened. I shouldn't have woke up for any of it. I shouldn't be here.
Another interesting thing that you mentioned I can't remember if you mentioned in this interview, but I remember talking on the phone with you about not seeing Jesus's face. And it's interesting that he didn't show you his face. And you guys spoke telepathically, right?
Yes. He did give me the vision of the hourglass. And at one point, he did give me a vision of his eyes. And I just thought that was interesting too. It was so heavy, emotionally, because he had so much love and so much compassion. I also saw a lot of sorrow, a lot of sadness too. And I knew it was related to his lost children, the ones that were lost to the world. He has feelings. I mean, it hurts him deeply,
Speaking of lost children, for those that are watching right now, they're on the fence, they're moved by your testimony. What would you tell that person right now that does not know Jesus?
Oh, I would plead with them to please just give him a chance. Give Jesus a chance. He died for you, and he didn't just die. He suffered terribly for you. If you were the only person on this earth, he would have done it all for you. And he will give you hope. He will give you a testimony. He will give you a future. Maybe you had a bad childhood. Maybe you had, unfortunate circumstances. The enemy uses those things to try to keep you from God or make you mad at God or turn you away from God, make you question him. Don't fall for the enemy's tricks. He's a master manipulator, deceiver. And if you're not walking with the Lord, I'm sorry, whether you want to hear it or not, you're walking with the enemy, and there is no middle ground. So I would just plead with you to just give him a chance and see what he'll do for you.
There's no middle ground. It's interesting how in the Bible talks about rather you be hot or cold, but the lukewarmness, that fence, the middle fence is going away. Pick a side,
It's becoming more and more clear. Choose choose this day who you will serve.
It's better to just go all in.
And because you're only cutting yourself short, you're missing out. I didn't realize all those years and years, Vlad, that I could have had this personal relationship with the Lord. I didn't realize what I was missing out on. I thought reading the Bible was something I was supposed to do for him. It was just something he expected of me, like clean, like when you're a kid and you're supposed to clean your room or make your bed. I was just shooting myself in the foot by not realizing how special and important and how much better life would be in a relationship with him, a personal relationship with him. Somebody told me one time, I said, I believe in God. And they said, well, so does Satan. And that hit me. And I was like, well, that's a good point there. Yeah. He's not going to heaven, So it makes a big difference, I think, in your, not only in your walk with him, but just in your life, You're evolving and growing and learning, and he is able to bless you more. Oh, and that's another thing he told me. You know how many times I've saved you that you don't even know about? That's what he told me. We've all been saved many times. He intervened. We didn't even know it. We didn't even know it several times, all of us, and even the non-believers too.
I've heard other near-deathers say the same thing, that Jesus told them that he saved them so many times from different car accidents, different experiences. He spared their life.
Yes. We left the house 5 minutes late for work. Had we been on time, we would have been involved in a fatal accident, Things like that we don't even see. We don't even realize that he's saving us all the time.
Well, Diane, it's almost midnight here where I'm at. Everyone here is sleeping. I got to get up at 5:30 for prayer tomorrow morning. I'm leading. For those of you watching, you should join us for prayer every morning. I lead a prayer at 5:30. Might be shifting to 6 a.m. Here in the next week or so. But Diane, thank you so much for your time. I know you were so nervous, but you did such a good job. I appreciate you so much. It's going to bless a lot of people.
Oh, well, thank you, Vlad. I appreciate you. God bless you and your channel. And congratulations on 50,000 subscribers. That's great.
I know. That's 50,000 souls. Wow.
The Lord has blessed you. He's blessing you because you're doing something that we all need. We need encouragement. We don't get a lot of it in the world. So God bless you and thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. I want you to check out another video with my friend Corey Enderby, who shares his incredible story of seeing his father in hell and the spiritual battle that unfolded. It's a powerful and unforgettable testimony. You can find it on the screen. If you don't see it on the screen, then check the description below. Until next time, have a great rest of the day, and I will see you in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.